G'day mate, 40 here. So, if there's anything good about this show, right, if I have any positive tendencies, if I make any contribution, if I am adding anything to your life, if I add anything to your understanding about what's going on in the world, what's going on inside of you, right, this is only true essentially to the extent that I'm emotionally honest, right? If you're emotionally honest, then when something doesn't make sense, either you don't have the information you need or people are lying to you. So things like crypto, all right, doesn't seem to make sense. Right? A lot of the arguments don't hold up, and so that may just be because many of crypto's biggest boosters are lying to you. Like Sam Bankman-Fried just got all sorts of positive press. Why did he get positive press? Because he was on the left and he presented himself as a person trying to do good things, fund the Democratic Party, and so the left dominates the media. So he got a ton of good press because he was aligned with the predominant values of the news media. So if you looked at Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and thought, I don't understand how they're making money, this doesn't make sense, then that's because they were lying to you. The news media was lying to you. Right? So when I hear people tell me, oh, I'm always honest, I'm always upright, I always do the right thing, right? Those people are lying to me, obviously. But most important of all, they're lying to themselves. And so if you lie to yourself, you're going to be really lousy at detecting when other people are lying to you. But if you're honest with yourself, then it's going to ping for you when other people are lying to you. So you notice some people are really good at detecting when other people are lying to them. That's because they're honest with themselves. Other people are terrible at noticing when other people are lying to them and manipulating them. That's because they're not honest with themselves. So this also applies to the news. Right? You read the news and it doesn't make sense. Right? The whole crypto boom, FTX boom doesn't make sense. That's because people are lying to you. If the transsexual revolution does not seem to you like a good thing, it's because the people who are telling you that it's a good thing are lying to you. The World Cup is in Qatar. That doesn't make sense. That's because people are lying to you. Right? Qatar only achieved the World Cup by bribing people. All right? So as soon as it announced that the World Cup would be played in Qatar, you immediately started thinking of 10 reasons why this is a really bad idea. All right? Those people who are telling you it was a good idea were lying to you. Right? FIFA was lying to you. FIFA was essentially bought off. Right? FIFA is incredibly corrupt. And that's also how the world works. If there are decisions made in your business, in your line of work, in your school, in your community that don't make any sense, that's because and you're emotionally honest, it's because either there's information that you don't know or people are lying to you. So Qatar getting the World Cup is a great example of how much of the world works, right? By things going on behind the scenes, secret deals, skullduggery, right? All sorts of things don't make sense, that are bad for soccer in this instance, right? Bad for fans, bad for the world. Right? Why did this happen? Because a small number of people got bribed. So a lot of things happen because you've got a small number of people who are able to make things happen, even if it's bad for the group. Right? So the incentives for corporations aren't exactly the same as the incentives for leading individuals in a corporation. The incentives for a group are not the same as the individual incentives for people who dominate the group. So when you ask who benefits, then that's a great way of opening up how the world works. Like, who benefits from this scam? Who benefits from Qatar getting the World Cup? Obviously Qatar benefits, but the people who made the decision and got paid off, right, they benefited and everyone else gets screwed. So there are all sorts of public issues where the general public good has no constituency, such as free speech. It's not really much of a free speech coalition with a lot of funding, right? So there are all these very specialized, well-funded groups who have an interest in restricting speech, such as the Anti-Defamation League, and they're funded and they're organized and they're highly competent, and so the people who are opposing them are not nearly as well funded, frequently not as competent, and may not even be as strongly motivated. So you've got a public good, free speech, but those people who are lined up to protect the public good, right, they don't have the funding, they don't have the incentives, they don't have the motivation, and very likely don't have the competency to pull things off. G'day mate, 40 here. We're at Manly, going on a walkabout. So, been listening to some of Mark Shapiro's lectures on Zachariah Frankel. He might be considered the founder of conservative Judaism, and Mark Shapiro says he was a greater scholar than Abraham Geiger, who may be considered the founder of Reform Judaism, and a greater scholar than Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, might be considered the founder of modern Orthodox Judaism. So all three of the modern denominations of Judaism got their denominational start in Germany in the 19th century. So Zachariah Frankel, he wasn't a left-winger like Abraham Geiger in the Reform. He regarded himself as a creator of the historical positive school. So he saw Judaism as developed over time rather than just dropped by God from man to Mount Sinai 3,200 years ago. And he also took a positive perspective on it rather than the more critical perspective of reform. Somehow that historical positive moniker didn't really take off. Okay, better watch ourselves here. We're at the Police Institute. So Mark Shapiro notes that all the modern movements of Judaism, they all regard themselves as carrying the mantle of the Pharisees. So from a non-Jewish perspective, right, the Pharisees are supposed to be the bad guys. From the perspective of the New Testament and Christianity, the Pharisees are legalistic and small-minded and petty. But from Jewish perspective, like all modern Jewish denominations, they carry the mantle of the Pharisees. From Jewish perspective, the Pharisees were dynamic and creative, adapting Judaism to changing times. And Mark Shapiro talks about finding a couple of poseks from 18th and 19th century who were A-OK with counting women in a minyan, a prayer minyan. That's a quorum of 10 males traditionally to constitute a minyan to be able to say certain prayers. And Mark Shapiro pointed it out to his Harvard professors, Tversky, and said how radical this was. And Dr. Tversky said, what determines whether something's radical or not is time. Right? Time and space, community, situation. Right? Situation changes things, whether they're considered radical or acceptable. So there are a whole bunch of beliefs that are totally unacceptable today, but were acceptable 120 years ago. Okay, so 120 years ago, Jews were regarded as a race, right? There was race science. People felt good about their race, including white people, and times have changed. That's no longer socially acceptable. So you want to form some kind of identitarian movement, you're going to be isolated, rejected, marginalized, persecuted if you're white and you try to do it on the basis of white racial identity. But if you do it on the basis of Christianity, then it's much less controversial. So instead of talking about race, you just talk about Christ as King. And you see this is the approach taken by Nick Fuentes and Godwood and a whole bunch of other dissident right thinkers. They realize that there's no future in an explicitly racial identity. You have to fit your cause into the mantle of what works. So just like all Jewish denominations situate themselves under the mantle of the Pharisees. So to revolutionary movements of the 21st century, not going to usually be very successful if they come out and say we're revolutionary, right? Usually you're going to be more successful if you tie yourself into tradition some way, like make the case that you're socially acceptable. So no one came along and said, oh, we're starting a new religion. People said, no, we're just fulfilling what's already here. We're just reforming what's already here. We're just setting straight what's already here. And that's a formula that works. Like coming along straight out and saying, we're here to create a revolution, like Richard Spencer used to talk about, and that's a suicidal path. People don't want to sign on for that. Now, you can tie yourself into the past and practice eisegesis, right? Meaning you read whatever meaning you desire into the past, into the text, even if it's not there. As opposed to exegesis, where you just try to deduce from the text what's there. So you can read meaning into it and still tie yourself into tradition. But you need a winning formula. Right? You need something that people can hold on to. You need to show that you've got some time-tested formula, that you're wired into the wisdom, practice, and rituals of the past. You can have a lot more success with that approach, coming along saying, hey, we're going to change everything. So how much reforming can you do until you leave Orthodox Judaism? So one definition is that Orthodox Jews accept the authority of the Shulchan Aruch, which is a 15th century 4-volume compendium of Jewish law by Yosef Karo. And we don't always hold by the Shulchan Aruch today, right? Jewish law has adapted and changed since the issuing of the Shulchan Aruch, but if you explicitly come out and say that you're jettisoning the Shulchan Aruch, then that's going to leave you outside of Orthodox Judaism. Now, what you need to do, if you're going to work within a system, within a group, within a tradition, within a community, within a people, you have to get other people to sign on. So if you just unilaterally abrogate the Shulchan Aruch, right, you're not going to have any pull within Orthodox Judaism. But if you can phrase things in a way that garners support from many other members of your group, right, your fellow Orthodox Jews or whoever your group is, then you're much more likely to be successful. Now, many people in dissident movements don't really want to be successful. They just want to feel as though they're edgy. They just want to feel important. Right? They're just in it for the feels. They prefer to live in their delusions rather than in reality. And so those people aren't going to be successful. But if you're going to be successful with your group, your cause, reforming your people, your tradition, your religion, your nation's politics, you have to get others to sign on. And usually there are far more effective ways than directly trying to recruit people to your cause. Like if you can subtly insinuate that they came up with it on their own, they made their own journey to where you're at. Right? People can change effortlessly if they feel that they have agency and they are the force behind the change. But if you directly try to change people, they always resist. So it's not as easy getting communal support, right? Most people find it a lot easier to just go it alone. You have a lot more freedom, a lot more ease, but your work doesn't have as much resonance. You're much more likely to get ignored. So this would also apply to my father. My father tried to reform the Seventh-day Adventist Church without gathering sufficient support among the administrators who had the power to bring about these changes. And so even though he privately got many scholars or had many scholars on his side, the administrators, the people who had the power, the canny, sophisticated political players in the church, did not sign on. And in the end, Seventh-day Adventist Church rejected my father and rejected his reform of the message, and Seventh-day Adventism is more traditional and distinctive and has gone in the very opposite direction of my father's teachings, and my father is being left to the sidelines. So that's what usually happens if you pay no mind to your level of support. You pay no mind to recruiting people using subtlety and flattery and care and compassion, right? Then you're going to have a lot more success than if you just try to bulldoze people, or if you're just so sure that you're right, then people aren't going to listen to you. So we pretty much do everything with the consent of the community. And once you arouse enough opposition, right, you're going to be flattened. I mean, Richard Spencer's a strong guy, but after the Hailgate controversy, he felt as though he was flattened. In fact, the cumulative toll of the hatred directed towards him has shifted him back into a mainstream perspective from 2020 on. So he just can't take living on the outskirts of society any longer. Right? It's very painful to be rejected by society and the subject of tremendous opprobrium. It's a lot easier to work within the society, but it requires a discipline. It requires a self-abnegation. It requires taking other people's feelings into consideration. And for some people this is natural, like for healthy people this is natural. Right? If you're one of those people who naturally moves towards people rather than away or against, right, then taking other people's feelings into consideration will come naturally. You'll be much more socially successful. But if you are by inclination someone who moves away from people, moves against people, like my father and me, through much of our lives, we've been much more naturally inclined to move away from people or against people rather than toward people. So that largely accounts for our social failures. Now you can form relationships, particularly with a spouse, and I think with my mother, and that helped to moderate my father's tendencies to move against and to move away from people. And So those tendencies were muted. He learned to move with people, move towards people, and got along socially much better. But when she died, then his life was thrown into turmoil, and moving away from people, moving against people, became stronger and stronger. Though my stepmother at times was a moderating influence in ways, in the end the tendency to move away just became dominant. He got kicked out of the church's ministry. So a formula for social success is move towards people, moves towards the traditions that they love, the practices that they love, the interpretations that they love, and then seek to update them or modify them or slightly redirect them in a direction that is congenial with people, and then you'll be able to build a following and a much more effective social movement. G'day mate, 40 here. I'm listening to a Mark Shapiro lecture, and makes the point that Italians just have a very different attitude towards the body, even Jewish Italians.
This book is going to have it's going to say 5 heads because there's 5 chapters. But look what the little boys are doing. And can anyone explain to me why? This is obviously this is part of the artistic symbolism in Italy during the 17th century, 18th or 17th century. 3 boys urinating there, or the putti. I don't know. And this is repeated 4 more times at the beginning of each section. If anyone knows about art history, I tried to.
Okay, so putting photos of boys urinating is not a major trend in Jewish holy books, right? Only happens with the Italian versions.
Find the answer. All I could find was that you have a couple in Italy. You have a couple fountains that have images like that. But for the life of me, I don't know why you put it in a book, and for the double life of me, I don't know why you put it in a sefer. I'm not going to say it's untheistic, it just seems stupid. I mean, I don't know what's up. But that's because I'm missing something. There must be something here that I don't know, and I just thought you'd find this interesting, that this appears in a sefer. Once you start looking in these old stories, you come across all sorts of weird stuff. So I'll take any suggestions. Okay, getting back to our story. So we just saw the exemplify rakanati, permitting an organ and permitting a non-Jew to play it on Shabbos. Now, already in the 17th century, the tshuva we just saw is the early 19th century. Already in the 17th century, there were synagogues in Italy that had organs in them, as well as synagogues that used.
Okay, so the main point is that Italians tend to have very different attitude towards nudity than other Jews. So I had a friend who was an Orthodox Jewish nudist, but that's exceedingly, exceedingly rare. Right? That's not how Jews typically roll. Right? You'd be hard pressed to think of anything more non-Jewish than public nudity. Right? That's a Greek thing. Many other cultures do it.
It's the same thing. Pope John Paul II has the Catholic justification of the human body.
So the Catholics have their justification. All right, their Christian justifications for paintings of the nude body, but very rare thing in Jewish holy works such as prayer books, but with the exception with Italian Jews. This
appears in Venice in 1715, but it's published by the yeshiva, the Talmud Torah. They call it Talmud Torah. That's the yeshiva of Ferrara. And what it was is you had all the different rabbis, Talmidei Chachamim, who were members of the yeshiva, would publish their tshuvot. And the editors of it, one of them we see here was Yitzhak Pranti, the famous Yitzhak Pranti, the Pachad Yitzhak. I said already that Professor David Malkiel is just coming out with a book in English Academic Studies Press on this is an encyclopedia, multi-volume encyclopedia of halacha called the Pachad Yitzhak. And you see there I actually think technically they're not called cherubs, they're putti, I think, which we use the term putti for young boys like that. And you see that, you see they're naked, and the nakedness in Italy, they have a different approach to the human body that we're used to, less puritanical, and I can show you numerous title pages of Sfarim, which have not just men, women in various states of undress. If you look at my book, Changing the Immutable, I have some pictures.
Okay, so Sfarim means holy books in Judaism.
I know of no example of any rabbi that ever protested these title pages, these pictures, and I don't need to show you them now. You can just look at the book. I'm sure you've seen them all. Today, they never would. They were considered untheistic, but I think it's almost like the Catholic justification of the human body in paintings, the same thing. Pope John Paul II even gave a speech on this, which you can find online, about when they reworked the Sistine Chapel, and he spoke about the human body. That's the only way I can explain it. It definitely was not regarded as unseeing. You have this, and you don't only have it in Italian printing and Amsterdam printing. You even have it in Eastern European printings as well. So leave that aside. That's not an issue. What I want to show you, there was something else, which I can't understand.
All right, that's Mark Shapiro there from Torah in Motion. And this is his March 14 talk, The Rise of Reform and the Rabbinic Response. Here at Manly Beach. It's 5:26 p.m. Sunday afternoon here, and a few hours ago on my long walkabout I saw that Donald Trump has been reinstated to Twitter. So I think without a doubt Twitter is going to be a much more interesting place with Donald Trump in it. And even Richard Spencer, who's been just overwhelmingly critical about Trump for the past 3 years, he's starting to sympathize with Donald Trump again because the GOP establishment has turned so decisively against Trump. But if you're going to get Richard's latest insights, I must warn you, the price for a monthly subscription to his Substack, which is jam-packed with content, is now $9.
Except for you, Kurt.
Oh, okay. Well,
There's been compromise.
I did. You need that second Jeep, don't you? That's all right.
Oh, yeah, second Jeep, yeah. I actually did, just to let you guys know, I actually did increase the monthly rate to $9. I thought 6 was good for a while, but we have gotten I'm really happy with Substack. I kind of wanted to go a little low, because I wasn't, a couple of things. I thought that there was at least a chance that I would get kicked off. Because, I'm on Twitter. I don't think I'm going to get kicked off Twitter. 99% sure. I was kicked off YouTube for no good reason.
So yeah, the smarter you are, the better the chances are that you'll learn to play within the rules. So Richard Spencer, whatever your criticisms of him, is a pretty smart guy. He's learning to color between the lines, play within the rules.
And so I was just a little bit tentative because I had heard the kind of core of this group that it's growing out of during 2020 and in 2021, we just kind of had a kind of like secret Substack, you could say. And it was people who I had their email address. We kept it there. I didn't do any promotion because we were still just kind of coming out of that era of the alt-right and blah blah blah, and getting deplatformed everywhere.
So yeah, a key part of Richard Spencer's evolution is he just got tired of getting kicked out of everywhere, getting kicked off of everything. You get tired when you're living on the margins. You want mainstream respectability once again.
I think I've kind of been able to...
So Richard's teaching a new class about Plato's allegory of the cave, and you can think of his own journey coming out of the cave back into the sunlight of mainstream respectability. Right? People want to be liked. Right? It's a very hard thing to live on the margins day in, day out. It can be edgy and exciting for a brief period, but it really starts to wear on you.
Like that. And I don't think, first off, I'm not doing anything worthy of being deplatformed, and then A, and then B, I genuinely do think that Substack is dedicated to free speech, obviously within reason. And really what I'm focusing on now is just very different. So I think it's all going to work out. And anyway, it was $9 earlier.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to work out when you play within the rules, when you say what is socially acceptable, when you regain respectability. All right?
You got in at 6? Woo, you got a bargain. But I won't raise it. I will say that, barring Weimar-style hyperinflation, at which point it will be raised $10 every day. I will not raise that for a while. I think that's just a good kind of solid price.
So this is a Richard Spencer Substack group call on November 17th.
Instead, you can release the Spencer nutraceutical like Alex Jones.
I could just sell you guys sugar pills, yes.
So Richard's got a new essay out making the case for banning Alex Jones. He says serial liar like Alex Jones just so degrades the public discourse that we're better off having Alex Jones banned from social media. I've been ambivalent about Alex Jones. It didn't bother me when big social media companies banned him. On the other hand, I'm not as sure as Richard Spencer that it's a good thing. I'm just neutral on it.
I mean, it is kind of like this horrifying perverse incentive where I'm trying to sell you guys like discussion courses on Thus Fuck Zarathustra, and then if I were selling you guys dick pills, like we would be making hundreds of thousands. It's pretty depressing.
It's only depressing if you have a misguided view of human nature. And if you have a realistic understanding of yourself and of other people, it's not so depressing.
But I think I also have a different than Alex Jones does, but hopefully, we'll see. Generally speaking, I feel this kind of weird, this weird feeling right now of almost being sympathetic towards Trump again.
Right, so when everyone else on the right-wing side is against Trump, like when the right-wing news media is turned against Trump, in addition to the mainstream media, where Trump is just getting kicked and denied and degraded and debased by everyone, then Richard the contrarian is feeling a strange new respect for Donald Trump.
Because he is so hated by the establishment. And so I almost have this, the Republican establishment, the true conservatives, the cucks. And I almost have this Pavlovian response to actually support him when he's being attacked by these people, or dismissed, or ignored, and so on. But he is in pretty much the exact place where he was in 2015, which is basically being dismissed and ignored by the mainstream conservative establishment, including Fox News, and being denounced, in some quarters, and yet kind of sticking to his guns and doing it. I have to say, I've hated Trump for a while, but I kind of have a certain sympathy for him when he's in this position. It's a weird feeling, to be honest.
It's not so weird, Richard.
But as I said,
it's not such a weird feeling, Richard. You're a contrarian, right? No worries, mate. We understand that you're not going to come out with the same perspective as everyone else. So I think not so strange why you're suddenly sympathetic to Trump.
I did a space on this, and I put up a 45-minute monologue that I did that you guys can listen to when you have the time. But I do think it's a very different time to 2015, because in 2015 he was able to define himself so boldly with the build the wall and Mexicans are rapists. There was just this craziness right out at the gate of his campaign in 2015, and I just found his speech the other night just so remarkable for how boring it was. It was just a mainstream Republican speech with a few hot side items thrown into the mix, like we're going to execute drug dealers or something. But even though I do imagine that
yeah, does Trump have the energy, the enthusiasm, the joy to run again? That's not evident. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to run for president.
Generate a stir among his base. It just doesn't have the kind of central mobilizing quality of build the wall and the Mexicans are rapists and stuff like that. So anyway, I guess you can tell I just have a lot of ambivalence about where things are at the moment. But my general thesis is that the Trump campaign has always been this kind of upside down campaign, and that it's always relied on craziness. And absent that Dionysian quality, all Trump is left with nothing, and the GOP is basically left.
Okay, so when the left controls the cultural means of production, and the left controls almost all of our institutions, revolt against an enemy who seems to control everything, right? That's going to seem crazy. You're not going to necessarily do that coolly, calmly, rationally, and moderately. That kind of revolution is going to contain a considerable element of the crazy.
With boring candidates and policies that are just clearly unpopular. The GOP is left with, we won't cancel $10,000 of your student loans. And
No, the main argument for voting for the GOP is to lock criminals up, to be tougher on criminals, lock them away, thereby reducing crime rates. Second main argument for voting for the GOP is that we're going to enforce border law. We're going to restrict immigration, both legal and illegal, as Donald Trump very successfully did by the 2020. So those are the first two primary reasons for voting for the GOP. And three, is to resist the war of woke culture. So there are three main reasons for voting GOP.
We'll ban abortion, and we will offer tax cuts and stuff like that. That's what they're left with. And with Trump, he brings to the party the craziness of build the wall, the alt-right, white nationalism, and then all of this morphing into COVID conspiracies and QAnon and so on.
No, with Trump, you get a lot of real talk, right? That's the advantage with Trump, right? You get some real talk. You get a level of honesty that is, pretty rare among politicians.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I guess like one of the things it would never flights. I think it's the ship's already sailed kind of thing. But you could I don't know, anybody that's on antidepressants or whatever. You're just like, okay, well, you can't breathe. But I don't know, short of forcing some. Right. Really, that's kind of what it implies.
But it doesn't ultimately solve the issue. The issue is that it's too easy to be alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I know you were joking when you said sterilize everyone in antidepressant, but also there's the issue of just overdiagnosis and just ramp. You live in the modern world and it kind of makes you unhappy.
And the fact that one of the things is that depressed people.
Well, if we lived in a more traditional society, I suspect that people would not be as unhappy. And I think a lot of the unhappiness, disconnection, mental illness is a result of people being disconnected from family, normal human connection, the community, which is something that's a lot easier to do when you don't have this vast array of civil rights laws restricting basic freedoms.
Like other people depressed kind of, being around themselves.
Yes.
You never really know.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any answers to this. I think it's a real thing, and but I don't know. It's one of the reasons why I've kind of made this shift. I've, Mark Brahman and I.
Look, the main reason Richard made this shift is because he wants, respectability. He's tired of being hated. But here he explains why he's not doing shows with Ed Dutton anymore, and instead he's doing shows with Mark Brahman. Now, I miss Ed Dutton. I prefer that realist approach. I don't get any benefit from Mark Brahman, but doing shows with Mark Brahman is essentially escape into a fantasy world. So some people like Game of Thrones, right? Some people like fantasy entertainment. Richard likes fantasy, right? He likes fantasies that he and Mark create. I don't get anything from him. I don't see the benefit of retreating to this fantastical, unreal, imaginary world that so entrances Richard and Mark Brahman.
Been friends for a long time, ever since he published his first articles at Radix Journal. Radix is alive again, but I published it a while ago, and more than a decade. And I do think that what we're working on does offer solutions to things, and I do think the kind of HBD stuff. And
so Richard says that what he and Mark are working on offers solutions. He's talking here about Apolloism. So, what exactly does Apolloism offer? It's, it's just, a watered down, more socially acceptable form of Nazi ideology. Seriously, what problems does Apolloism answer? Realism better equips people for life because you are placing them in reality. You're describing reality to them, so they're less likely to be disconnected from reality.
It's important, but it does become rather depressing, doesn't it?
It only becomes depressing if you are out of touch with reality, either the reality inside you or the reality outside of you. But reality is not inherently depressing. Know the truth will set you free. Reality is the beginning of wisdom. Reality is the beginning of effectiveness. Getting in touch with reality means becoming humble, right? You gain an appropriate understanding of where you stand vis-a-vis other people, right? But I don't think Richard wants to stay in reality. He wants to live in a world of fantasy. And Mark Brahman gives him this opportunity.
Oh yeah, I'm not particularly happy reading this. This is not like bedtime material.
No. And it's just
so material can be awesome and great and important. It's not necessarily the stuff you want to read before you go to bed, right? So just because you don't want to read it before you go to bed doesn't mean that it's not important.
No overarching cultural solution that we can actually offer.
Well, how about just becoming more exact and more precise about the nature of the truth? nature of reality, right? Rather than trying to offer these grand, top-down Germanic theories. Richard's very much kind of in the vein of German philosophy. So French and German thinkers, they loved grand theories, right? They love to propound grand theories, and they're pretty weak on evidence and empiricism. Now, in the Anglo tradition, all right, the Anglo tradition is much more empiricist, right? So Anglo scholars will come up with a bunch of empirical findings, then tentatively suggest a very modest theory. So French and German intellectuals love grand theories, but these grand theories tend to be quite disconnected from reality, and they're not particularly interested in providing the empirical support for their grand theories. And Richard sounds very much like these continental philosophers as opposed to the Anglos.
So it just becomes like dwelling on, this inevitable decline of the population or something. And I don't know. I think it's just, I just want to move away from that.
Maybe universal designer babies will be the solution, where everyone is just genetic engineered out of it.
Yeah, if you want a genetic white girl, watch the movie Danica. Wonderful movie.
I never saw it.
Paradise.
Yeah.
The original Black Pill film.
Rand Paul got into a hot water. I remember he plagiarized the Wikipedia article for Gattaca for this book. Just like, he was like, guys,
just never have any interest in listening to politicians speak or reading what they have to say. It's such a low level of discourse that they offer.
You can't have too much socialism. I mean, it's gonna be fucking Gattaca. All right, let's just flop on that socialism. Yeah, it's totally lame. But whoever wrote that book for him was probably Jack Hunter, actually, who used to write for Talkies magazine. Anyway, I'm almost sure he did it. But like, you plagiarized Wikipedia, really? It's cut and paste from the internet.
No one will notice. Rand Paul's book.
So what's your favorite Rand Paul book? What's your favorite Ron DeSantis book? What's your favorite Donald Trump book? Come on, man. Give me a break.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I just think all this kind of whining about the demographic decline of the white race or something. I mean, we got to understand, like, why this is happening. Like, why is...
Okay, Richard doesn't want to talk about it because it's socially unacceptable. We'll isolate him and increase the problems that he has to face. So it's fine, right? You don't have to be a martyr, right? There's no need to say things that come with a huge social price, but to then intellectualize the issue and say, I want to move towards cultural solutions, therefore I'm embracing Apolloism instead of realism. It's a bit hard to take.
Problem, and how can we reasonably solve this?
Right, like you're saying it's a spiritual problem first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't want to,
So, spiritual, that can mean many different things. And there are effective vehicles for a spiritual connection. But there are also a whole bunch of nonsense that just cloak themselves as spiritual. So how can you tell the difference between the real thing and the nonsense? By the fruits, right? By the behavior of people who embrace these varying forms of spirituality.
These prefaces of, I don't want to be a divisive drama queen, and then I just say what I'm about to say. So I had this conversation last night with someone who's a member of this group, actually.
So do you ever find yourself prefacing your conversations by saying, I don't want to be a divisive drama queen? I wager that if you need to preface your conversations by saying, I don't want to be a divisive drama queen, it may indicate that you have something of a compulsion towards being a divisive drama queen.
For more than a decade as well. And we're both kind of on the same boat. Like, I remember she was there at the Bacon Club stuff. She's been to a number of AMRADs. I don't know how many AMRADs I went to, probably half a dozen. I think we were both kind of like, she was talking to me about it last night. She was like, oh, AMRADs this weekend. I was like, what? I'm so out of the loop. But it's just all the same stuff. Like, they're just saying the same thing over and over again for decades. And it's all this just kind of doom and gloom. The white race.
Okay, so there are forms of social science that are replicable, right? There's certain basic truths that you may see in more and more facets of life, such as the predictive value of IQ scores, right? And it's not as exciting as having new, philosophical and spiritual insights for which there's no necessary empirical evidence. So often the tried and true and the boring is the most true and the most profound.
Decline. The traditional American majority doesn't have a chance. It's just this endless doom and gloom. And on one level, you don't analyze the situation and really understand what's happening. And on another level, there's just it's like trying to drain the ocean with a thimble or something. It's just the way they present the problem, there's just no real hope.
I suppose the Greater Idaho project definitely fell through because they mentioned that a while ago, and that seemed like a little bit of.
Could they mention that again? Move to Idaho?
Yes.
That's different than.
I doubt Jared would sign off on that actually.
That's actually different than. That's actually different than Greater Idaho.
So backstory to this is Richard feels hurt that Jared Taylor doesn't want him at Amaran events, that Jared Taylor doesn't want him to speak for him because Richard embraced Nazism with the Hail Our People, the Sieg Heil and the Nazi talk that Richard embraced. So therefore Richard was pushed away by Jared. And that's large part of the story that Richard's not talking about here.
Greater Idaho is basically the idea of all of Oregon outside of like Portland and surrounding areas joining Idaho, and moving to Idaho is part of the Northwest imperative where white nationalists move to the Pacific Northwest area, and have the system collapse or win a war against the U.S., and they create a white nationalist version.
Okay, so that's absurd. I'm thinking that these nationalists are going to move to the Northwest and then win a war against America, or the whole system's going to collapse and they're going to take over. Right, talk about living in fantasy land.
Cuba, that's at odds with the U.S. Two different things.
Give me a fucking. I don't know if it would involve. I'm not saying you support it. I know you're representing. I'm not going to shoot the messenger here, but guys, give me a fucking break. This, Northwest. I mean, I guess it's ironic that I'm saying this, being that I have actually done what they demanded. I actually.
Yeah. So Richard, for years, is most famous for calling for an ethno-state, right? For calling for the creation of this exact sort of thing. Now he's disavowing.
I'm making fun of it. Guys, it's just not happening. And we don't want that to happen. And like a bunch of white nationalists in Montana taking on the government, that is a one-way ticket to death.
Yeah, I don't know the details of it conflicting with the current government and like seceding from any of that stuff. Maybe.
Do you know what they do? Do you know what they do? The assumption that they have, which is just wrong, is the same assumption that Russians have, which is that America/NATO/the West is gay. And God, they have a black guy in charge.
Yeah, Rich is making a good point here that there's a lot of dismissal on parts of the dissident right that America and NATO are just gay, therefore not formidable. They're just doomed to decadence and decline. And American power, like Chinese power or Russian power, is relative compared to other nations and compared to the other major powers. The United States of America is in fantastic shape to be even more dominant in the years ahead than it is now.
Military, and they have some homosexual in the Marine Corps, so we could just go out there with our shotguns, baseball bats, and kick their ass right now. No,
I don't
can't. You can't.
I mean, even though I obviously still sympathize with them, and of course I guess all of us have our sympathies with them, but it's like, yeah, that is quite sad how they're on this fringe of Russia. I don't know.
Yeah. But to go back to like the all the stuff. I mean, it's like if we're just lamenting demographics, and I'm not against like seriously talking about demographics or something, but if we're just lamenting demographics, like that's going to be a real sob story.
Nobody is endorsing just lamenting demographics, but there are more sophisticated and accurate ways of understanding demographics, right? The white percentage of the population in the United States is vastly underestimated by U.S. Census Bureau methods. So if that's your thing, if that's something you're really interested in, then you should probably become more sophisticated, understand what's really going on. So the way the U.S. Census Bureau works is that if people identify as part Asian or part black or part Latino, all right, they're counted in the U.S. Census as wholly that, right? So if someone's 1/16th black or 1/16th Asian or 1/16th Latino, and they put down the U.S. Census Bureau that they're, part Asian and part white, the U.S. Census Bureau counts them as 100% Asian. So the white percentage of the population is dramatically undercounted by US Census Bureau figures, and the non-white section is dramatically overcounted. And those Asians, blacks, and Latinos who live in the United States, due to the overwhelming nature of America still being white, are very likely to marry someone white and therefore have white children.
There's just, like, there are really serious problems out there, and if you want to make yourself feel bad, you can do that pretty easily with just talking about demographics. And, you know, I know this might...
Yeah, if you talk about them in an ignorant way. I notice that many people in distant spheres just want to embrace the suck. They just want to embrace how bad everything is, how there's absolutely no hope, because I think it lets them off the hook for responsibility, for doing anything with their lives. It just kind of gives them permission to be vile and beastly and disgusting because it's all hopeless.
Almost like cowardly or something, but, you know, if something is that bad, like, you kind of have to move off it. And it's just...
Okay, if there is grim news, right, maybe there are just other things in life that you should be focusing on, not just on the grim news. Right? You can face reality and also have room in your life for things that are positive and beautiful and true and good, and things that are uplift you rather than things that drag you down. So you can judge, you know, what you do by its effect on you. Is it having a good effect on you? Is it making you happier, more effective? Right? Is it making you a better person? Is it making you more sober or less sober?
Endlessly talking, like, I don't know how much they even do black crime anymore, but, like, just endlessly publishing articles about how, like, white America is being demeaned or something. It just gets depressing and old and just, I don't know, it's just, you're living in a graveyard. And it's just not, I don't know, when I was a lot younger, and I sometimes get into this where I, like, judge other people for not going through what I've gone through, you know, even when they're younger than I am. It's like, you should be up to speed with me, like, but at the same time, like, I remember, like, you know, I don't know, like, I forgot my first day ever at, you know, I think it might have even been 2008 when I was editing Talkies Magazine or whatever, and it was like, you know, this is so edgy. You know, it's like, everything is taboo, we're just talking about so, like, badass. But after a while, when they talk about the same thing over and over, it's just not that badass anymore. It's just endless whining about, you know, pretty obvious problems that everyone agrees on. And I do think it's kind of, I don't know, it's just static. I think it's almost unhealthy.
Okay, wait. So this is the community that Richard's essentially been exiled from. So maybe
hey guys.
maybe you should provide that context.
He needs to kind of blow them out of the water or something.
So I think that's why it needs to be. How do they limit the amount of top
Opening for eugenics program? It might very well be a good way to make money. I do think that, like, she wasn't asked in 26, but again, we're past all this, and I think the way
Okay, he's not a big fan of Lauren Luma.
You can't just pull
everyone is just genetic engineered out of it.
Yeah, if you wanted to, all right, let's just hold off on that social.
Okay, I gotta fast forward here. I lost my place.
Two different.
Not just
10 seconds.
previously talking about demographics or something, but if we're just lamenting demographics, like, that's going to be a real sob story, because there's just, like, there are really serious problems out there, and if you want to make yourself feel bad, you can do that pretty easily with just talking about demographics. And, you know, I know this might sound almost like cowardly or something, but, you know, if something is that bad, like, you kind of have to move off it. And just endlessly talking.
Well, maybe you move off it as your primary focus. Doesn't mean you need to ignore it.
Like, I don't know how much they even do black crime anymore, but, like, just endlessly publishing articles about how, like, white America is being demeaned or something. It just gets depressing and old and just, I don't know, it's just, you're living in a graveyard. And it's just not, I don't know.
Look, all group identities are built in significant part by victimhood. We're being screwed over, we're being oppressed, we've been demeaned, we've been cheated, we've been raped, we've been murdered, right? That's a large part of group identity. Now, it shouldn't be 100% of your group identity, but that is a large part of the nature of group identity, be it Jewish, black, Christian, whatever.
When I was a lot younger, and I sometimes get into this where I, like, judge other people for not going through what I've gone through, but, you know, even when they're younger than I am, it's like, you should be up to speed with me, like, but at the same time, like, I remember, like, you know, I don't know, like, I forgot my first day ever at, you know, I think it might have even been 2008 when I was editing Talkies magazine or whatever. And it was like, this is so edgy. It's like, everything is taboo. We're just talking about so like badass.
So I had that sort of experience when I've been going to Orthodox synagogues for a long time, and then I went to a conservative synagogue where you could openly talk about historical criticism, biblical criticism, the historicity of the Exodus, and I thought, this is so edgy, this is so cool. Free speech, free scholarly inquiry. I was going to the library minion at Beth Am. We had much of the intelligentsia of conservative Judaism in Los Angeles, so I really enjoyed that for a few weeks, but I ended up missing the connection and the bonds that come with traditional Judaism.
Talk to some of the most interesting people.
Out of monarchy.
Okay.
Out of British.
Okay, so here's Yoram saying that there's not an inherent connection between democracy and conservatism.
Kind of the relational dimension is above that. So I wonder what, because essentially at this point in kind of our political history, politics is almost synonymous with democracy. I mean, what position does democracy hold here? Because democracy essentially is downstream from this perspective of, okay, we have the individual, consent, autonomy is the primacy, so they become the vehicle of kind of political voice. I wonder how that plays into your worldview.
Well,
to begin with, conservatives are not necessarily Democrats.
That is such an important point. All right, conservatism is not necessarily democratic. Conservatives are not necessarily small d Democrats. How would 40 answer her final question? Which writer you value whom no one has ever heard of? Stephen Turner, right? The philosopher of the social sciences, right? I think that would be my question. Take the fiction, it is good for the nefesh. Yeah, sometimes some fiction is good for the nefesh, right? So what's good for the nefesh is a very important question. Not the only question, right? There's time to deal into harsh reality, but this is really important that Yoram Hazony is making an important point here that conservatives are not necessarily small d Democrats. There are more important values than democracy and human rights. Right? An obsession with human rights, natural rights, democracy, process, parliament, government by discussion, right? These are liberal obsessions. These are not conservative obsessions. Conservative obsessions are heritage and people.
The tradition that I'm writing about in this book is one that developed out of monarchy.
And this is Yoram Hazony's book, What Is There to Conserve?
Out of British monarchy. And the English monarchy was, for a very, very long time, somewhat different from French or German monarchs. In that the traditional English constitution had a place for people other than the king in decision making. So if we take In Praise of the Laws of England by John Fortescue, which was written around 1470, we see that his argument is that the people of England are better off because the Parliament, the bicameral legislature, is responsible for laws and is responsible for taxation, and the king can't simply do whatever he wants. And out of this structure of a tradition of power sharing between the king and his subjects, you get the gradual development of the American Constitution, which in its early version was very, very similar to the English Constitution, and none of the people involved in drafting any of these constitutions called them democracy at that time. But still, Fortescue claims that among the advantages of the English Constitution is that the people are freer than they are in other countries.
Right, you can have a lot more freedom sometimes in an authoritarian regime that's not democratic than in a democracy, right? Democracy and liberal human rights are often at odds, right? A liberal society is not necessarily a democratic society. So in a liberal society, people have inalienable rights, which puts considerable limits to democracy. So often the more democracy you have, the fewer rights you have. The more rights you have, the less democracy you have. And so there are things that are more important than processes, such as the preservation, safety, and prosperity of your people.
when he says free, he's obviously not talking about what modern liberals mean when they say free, but he gives examples. He says, for example, the king cannot enter the house of an English farmer without his permission, and he certainly can't take things from the English farmer without his permission, or at least without a law from the legislature. And Fortescue associates these kinds of rights with freedom. He says that the reason that the English people flourish financially, and the reason that they eat better than in other countries is because of the sanctity of property and because of it.
Right. So if you're struggling to eat, right, if you're struggling to survive, you're struggling with violent crime, then democratic processes, the finer points of parliamentary discussions and political parties is probably not a top priority. People want results. Sometimes democracy delivers the best results. Sometimes liberalism delivers the best results. But liberalism always needs something plus. Right? Liberalism's never enough for a society. You need liberalism plus nationalism, or liberalism plus socialism. Right? Liberalism always needs something plus. This is a point Ross Douthat made in a column a couple of months ago.
Constitution that protects their property. So all of these things exist already in the 1400s in England, but I don't think anybody would have called it a democracy. So I think that if you ask, how does a conservative in this tradition view democracy? I think that the question is always, does it improve things or does it make things worse?
Exactly. Does it improve things or does it make things worse for your people, for a particular people at a particular time and place? Right? Sometimes democracy for your particular people at a particular time and place will make things better. At other times, a monarchy will work better. At other times, a tenocracy will work better. Other times, you'll be better off ruled by priests. Other times, you'll be better off in an authoritarian regime. Right? What makes things better for your people? That's the conservative concern.
And the democratization of the American Republic. I don't know. I don't think that the American Republic was doing badly before the two world wars. And if we're going to talk about where things go wrong, I'm not sure that things go wrong because of the fact that there's a extended suffrage in the United States. But we can talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's I think that the issue that I see with democracy is that it brings in, essentially you could also say that it becomes ruled by media, because where does the informed citizen get their information to be?
No, democracy has many problems, but it's not ruled by media. Right? People did not evolve to be gullible. Right? The media doesn't change a lot of minds. Right? There are no states where there's rule by media. Right? There's just no empirical foundation for that sort of observation. That's silly.
To be so informed to actually make a decision on a political level, and then that there's competing interests there, and it also brings in it turns politics into the matter of everyday life. Like, there is a certain freedom from politics that you have in alternative systems that I think is quite underrated, in the sense that now it's become a complete obsession, and it's become synonymous to religion. Like, the moment that religion left through the door, politics entered through the window, and now this is essentially the animating spirit for so much tribalism for all of this. So I think that's people might argue with me that it's a price worth paying, but it might also not be.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I think it's very easy and appropriate to look at what there is now and say, what there is now is really terrible. The reason I say this is because what there is now really is terrible. Because we are watching the disintegration of American society and the American nation. And
right. So the disintegration or the growth or strengthening of a society, that's more important than democracy sometimes. All right. So beautiful here in Manly. I've walked 13 miles today. I'm pretty tired, maybe not as sharp as I was at 6 a.m. now that it's 6:09 p.m. I found some protein yogurt at a local Coles store. Okay, Coles is like Kmart, so I had a protein yogurt and 2 mandarins to fortify me. Had 5 protein bars for lunch. And such a gorgeous day. I've just been chewing up the miles here in Manly.
We're watching a very similar thing happen in the UK, and it's not at all clear that having moved to all freedom all the time is the only value that's emphasized.
Right. Yeah. More freedom, more freedom, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
Societies it's not at all clear that they can survive. I mean, I just don't know that many people who have a great deal of confidence that the United States is going to exist 25 years from now. And now I'm a little bit older than you are, and probably than many of the listeners. So I can remember a time in which it didn't seem like the United States was on the verge of disintegrating. And so, my view of citizens voting and media striving to influence them is somewhat different because when I was growing up in New Jersey, I was born in Israel, but I grew up in the United States. And when I was growing up, certainly you knew that the major publications had a liberal slant, but.
So I've got hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of electronic equipment in my bag there on the bench, but I'm not afraid that someone's going to steal it when I turn my back. It's really nice being in a safe place.
You could basically count on their news to be reliable. In other words, you could in those days be someone who rejected the New York Times editorial line, but you could still trust that most of what it was that they were reporting was usefully accurate. And in the same way, it was impossible for the media, even if most of the media were liberal, it was impossible for them to just control the way that people think because there were competing media. Like the current condition in which virtually all major media broadcast the same thoughts.
So when I was here in Australia in the 1970s and 1980s, right, there were a lot of topless women bathing on the beach. Probably a third of women under 30, above 15 who were topless. But that's changed since the influx of Muslims in the 1990s. So I was out here in '89. There's still topless bathers galore at the beach. But during the 1990s and even after 2001, large influx of Muslims into Australia, and with that, the end, essentially, of topless bathers on the beach.
Lockstep with one another and in lockstep with a particular political line, and don't have any shame about using their platforms as in order to advance a political agenda. This is a new thing. I mean, I certainly don't want to claim that democracy always functioned perfectly well, but what we're seeing right now is a catastrophic shift from a culture in which reporters thought that whatever party they voted for, they thought that something like Hunter Biden's laptop would be.
Okay, this isn't exactly a catastrophic change. Unfortunate, not catastrophic.
As far as any one of them would want to break and want to get the lead in, because corruption was simply something that anybody could get a Pulitzer for reporting on corruption. It didn't matter whether it was the right or the left. So, again, without saying that it was utopian, I think that we have entered a period of utter dysfunction in the way that the media functions and also other institutions. At the universities, which 30 years ago we were able to tolerate a conservative or a rightist view on the faculty or among the students, and today, recently, most places, universities simply cannot tolerate these kinds of views. And we can go on, the government bureaucracy and so on. So we are certainly facing a horrific crisis, and we need to talk about what, if anything, can be done to get out of it. But I think that we should not exaggerate. I think it would be a mistake to exaggerate the kind of influence that the kind of political system you have has on whether it works or not. Because the reality.
So this is Yoram Hazony speaking on his book, What Is There to Conserve?
Is that I think that many different kinds of political systems can be made to work well if the people are inheriting traditions of mutual loyalty and upholding this.
Yeah, respect for tradition, right? That's a key part of being conservative, right? You think that time-tested ways of organizing people and communities is likely to be more effective than radical new innovations.
And striving to make it work. And the moment that the people are inheriting disloyalty and contempt for one another and for the system itself, it doesn't matter how beautiful and perfect it is on paper. It will just stop working, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and it feels to me like in liberalism itself, the kind of the baked-in, essentially the self-correcting feature of liberalism tends to become a god in itself. Like the idea that, okay, we are striving, essentially that's kind of the instinct of liberalism. We're always striving to morally improve, to end up on the right side of history. And that idea in itself kind of leads to that churning kind of resentment of the present moment, because we are, of course, still in the process of moral evolution. We kind of have to be a little bit, at least, resentful.
Yeah, and this constantly striving for moral improvement, it's largely a delusion, right? There are just certain inherent nasty qualities to being human and tradition usually offers us more effective ways to channel them.
Of our brethren, of the current situation, because we remember in the past the past is a very immoral place, or immoral place.
Yeah, that is a quintessential liberal view. The past was a very immoral place, and now we're just living through ever-increasing amounts of freedom.
Present, we're constantly improving, and only in the future will actual morality be possible. And even then, where you're still kind of in the churning permanent revolution. So I feel if with kind of this current perspective, is it even possible to love your brethren, have any sort of ties to any sort of...
So Alex Kashuta is not a particularly good podcast host. She's just all over the place with her questions. Is there an Australian Karen archetype? Not really. I mean, there are some Karens, Australian Karens, like American Karens, but it's not a major archetype of Australian personality. Australians tend to be pretty easygoing. I don't think Karens are easygoing. But Alex Kashuta just kind of meanders, right? Not exactly sharp and brief in her questions. The best questions are the shortest questions.
Historical, or making any sort of peace with your own history.
Well, we just switched topics from democracy.
Yeah, so she's just all over the place.
Liberalism, democracy and liberalism, obviously, they're not the same thing. Democracy is an extended suffrage where many more people get to participate in electing at least certain parts, if not all parts of the government. Liberalism is not a system of government. Liberalism is a set of ideas,
yeah, that's a great point. Liberalism is not a system of government. It's a set of ideas. There needs to be liberalism plus, liberalism plus democracy, liberalism plus nationalism. These passerbys look more in shape than the average fat, lazy American. I thought so too, but we're in the eastern suburbs of Sydney where the more affluent, the smarter people live, so they tend to be in better shape. Overall, I've found out to my dismay, and this did not used to be true, but now Australians are on average just as obese as Americans, I think. It was not that way until maybe the last 10, 20 years. So when I came to America in 1977, I was stunned at the huge number of fat people. But with each passing year, it seems like Australians more and more resemble Americans, though not on Sydney's eastern suburbs, where people tend to be in pretty good shape.
It comes very close in its current form to being a kind of religion, because the assertion that everybody is that everyone is perfectly free and perfectly equal, and that they only need to take on obligations that they consent to. And you were just referring to a third plank in a lot of liberalism, which is the claim that all that human beings need to do is think and argue, and then we'll figure all the answers to everything out just by thinking, and we don't need any kind of inheritance or tradition to build on. This set of axioms is a kind of a religion, and what it does is it undercuts and blots out any kind of good that's inherited from the past. And a very, very dramatic example of this is Thomas Jefferson, one of the American founders who was quite excessive in his liberalism, and it was in many ways a model for what we're seeing today. And Jefferson said that repeatedly that every generation is related to the previous generation as if it were a foreign country. He thought that that every 20 years you should just start from scratch and make up all the laws that you think are good for you, and then 20 years later you'll just do it again. So when you refer to this permanent revolution, you really are talking about something that is baked in. It is baked into liberalism, and the reason that the United States and Britain were able to survive for 2 or 3 centuries without decaying is not because there were liberals, but because there were conservatives. There were large numbers of people whose focus was on maintaining inherited traditions, and that means that they thought a great deal. They thought a great deal about what you would need to do in order for your inherited traditions to be transmitted to future generations. And all of that comes to sort of a crashing end after the Second World War. We can argue about why it does, but it's only after the Second World War that God and scripture become dispensable and are eliminated from the school system and from public life.
Okay, this is Yoram Hazoni speaking with Alex Kashuta. That's Kaschuta, lives in Romania. And I'm just going to leave it there for now. Bye-bye.